Hey everyone, Mark from Hobby Extreme and Nick behind the camera. We've got a couple of interesting things to show you today. Now, we're new to jets, miniaturized turbines in general, and we're trying to get as much data out of the airplane back to the remote, back to the controller as possible. Now, this is important for several reasons. One, it's very important if we know we have an engine failure. You're not always going to be able to hear it when you're at idle. So we want the remote, we want the control to tell us when we have a flameout. So we have to get telemetry from the model into our remote and set parameters to know when we're going to have the actual flameout. We do this in the miniaturized turbines through the fuel pump wattage or power. Where if the power drops below a certain amount, the turbine knows that it's a flameout. It tells the radio to flame out. We actually get a stick shaker on the controller, which is really cool. And it actually has an audible warning that we have an engine failure. So we've been working on this to try to get the telemetry into the remote. Now, as you know from the last videos, Nick and I just switched to Jeti. Now, Jeti's awesome, except for it's third-party software programming, so we have to learn it ourselves so we can put it on the remote. Now, something cool about this, because it's third-party, is there's an app that was created that's called Lua. And Lua will actually display our telemetry on the remote if we tell it what parameters to accept the telemetry from. What we're doing right now is trying to tell it that we have turbine RPM, and that's why you see it flashing in blue. The engine shut down. We have pump voltage, which is also flashing in blue because it's telling us that we have no power to the pump right now. We have our battery for our turbine, and that's also very important. We have set those parameters up correctly. We figured that out. And then we have, of course, our EGT, our engine gas temperature. The EGT is also very important to tell us if we're hitting max parameters or not. But all of this is very neatly displayed on the remote. One of the reasons why we went Jeti, it's just very intuitive when you look at the remote. It's very bright, and you can see these parameters as you would in a normal aircraft. Me being a full-scale pilot, Nick being a full-scale pilot, we like to have stuff that we can look at on a glance and be able to tell how our engine's performing, how our aircraft's performing, and these Lua apps give us the ability to do that. It's really cool. So what we're trying to do now, we're going to show you. We're going to do a startup here, and we'll show you how it works on the Lua app itself. There's several things we have to do on the jet to prep it for start. First of all, Nick, if you want to come here. Once we turn on the model, we have to actually open the valve for fuel. Now, it's important that we shut this valve off for fuel when we shut down the motor so that no diesel fuel leaks into the burner section of the turbine and produces a hot start for the next starting cycle. We turn the valve on, and then we go to our remote. And then on the remote here, we have to tell the turbine we want it to arm for start. We do that by increasing our trim to 100%. Now notice Nick and I had already set a low RPM warning, and it's going to keep telling us that warning until we actually start the turbine. Let's go ahead and start it. All we have to do is hit the throttle to full. Once the turbine starts rotating, we shut it back down to idle. Now the turbine's going to go into an auto start sequence. The igniter's just kicked in, we can hear it. Turbine is now getting fuel and it's starting to spin up. Notice on the remote, RPM gauge, EGT gauge, and our pump value. Engine's now running. Got to shut it down. We shut the trim down to shut off, and the turbine automatically shuts down. Notice the remote stopped yelling at us because it knows it's in a condition for shutdown. We had set that up on the trim itself, so when the trim's at max, the remote knows the engine should be running. If the trim is not at max, the remote says, okay, you want it to shut down, so it stops giving us that alert message. Now, one thing we have to figure out, though, if we haven't figured it out yet, is the alert we set on the remote itself is giving us a warning even though the engine's running. So it's either in the pump value, we incorrectly set that, or it's set on the RPM value because it keeps saying RPM to us. So we're going to check that out. We're going to try to figure that out, and we're going to bring it back once we get it figured out and show you what we did. Model, no, sensor alarms. Oh, we have two here, that's why, pump equals 0. We're just going to go ahead and hit delete on that one. So pump 2, less than or equal to 90, should actually now give us the alert we want. If we go to sensors, why is that not, oh, sorry, wrong one, display telemetry. We see all the telemetry we have in the first screen, and we see in the second screen is all our turbine telemetry, generic data displayed. And then on the third screen, we see that we have our installed Lua panel, DFM instrument panel 1. So that's all set up. We go back to our sensors. This should now not give us a warning until we go full RPM or full.
Warning. Low motor RPM.
Okay, now it's giving us that, which is normal. Now we're going to start the motor again. Now we haven't noticed it. I do have to reset it once it does a shutdown. Not sure why yet, but we're still learning how the ECU. So radio's now telling us you shut down the model. Yeah, we know. All right, now our EG pops up. That's good. So we're going to go to start cycle.
Low motor RPM.
Auto start sequence has started. I hear the igniters.
Low motor RPM. 0. Warning.
All right, that was unsuccessful. I had set the alarm parameters to 90 watts. I believe that's the metric it's using for determining the power. I've turned that to 90 watts because we know that idle is 100. The value is 100. So we want to bring it below the idle value so that if the radio senses below 100, then it knows that the engine's got a problem and it sends us an alert. So I'm going to go back into the menu, find out what we set on the alarm that's different from what the radio is seeing once the engine is actually running. So we see here we got pump number 2. This value shows it is enabled. Condition X equals or is less than or equal to. We're going to go into that value and we're going to say X is less than instead. And that might be because it's equal or above, it's actually giving us an alert. So we're just going to do X is less than, not greater than. Okay, so it only has an X equal or less than. So that does work fine. So let's find out why this watt power, we're going to set it down to 9 and see if it's dividing it by 10 by a chance. Let's set that.
Now, the Lua app, there's no things in there, right? That's alarm-wise?
Now, so the radio's taking the data generically.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, the radio's taking the numbers generically for the Lua app. It's just taking the telemetry sensor data and it's just converting it into a graphical interface. There's nothing in the Lua app that is going to change the values for the radio to alarm. To my understanding, I've got to figure out why that setting of 90, which is what we know to be true. And let me tell you why. Let's go back into, instead of going to the Lua app, we're going to go to the generic readout. Now, if you look at the generic readout, you'll see that it shows just RPM, turbine EGT. That EGT2 is, I thought, was maybe a secondary stage. It is not, so I'll delete that. And then the turbine pump, 0 PW. So it's 0 PW right now because the engine is actually shut down. Once we get to idle, that 0 PW will show 100. That's the value. I assumed that if we had X equal or less than idle value of 100, that's when it would alert us. However, once we get above that 90 value, it's still alerting us as if we have an unsafe condition, and we don't. So, oh, by the way, our fuel's actually working. You see the turbine fuel is down to 96%, and that's because every time you reset the model, it goes to 100% based off how many milliliters we have of fuel. We figured out that 1 gallon of fuel is about 3,700 and change milliliters, so we set the radio to know that that's how much fuel we have. It's just guessing in the model based on how much power the pump is getting, and known values of how much fuel it's pumping based on that pump power. So it's guessing based on the fuel. We know that we can fly this model for about 8 minutes. And have plenty of fuel left. But it'd be neat. It's not necessary. Everybody flies model based on time, right? That's what we've been doing for the last 30 years. But it's kind of cool if we can get it to give us a gas gauge and kind of show us based in percentage of how much the pump is powered to give us an estimate of how much fuel's left. So that seems to be working. But the actual power to the pump does not seem to be alerting us correctly. So we're going to have to fiddle with that for a minute, and then we'll come back and tell you how we fixed it if we get it fixed. On telemetry sensor selected. They have 2 pump values for some reason. Not sure why. There's a pump 1 and a pump 2. Let's try starting it, see if this goes away.
We're going to piss off my neighbors.
We can't do this too much more. We're going to piss off everybody in the neighborhood.
It's not quiet.
It's not quiet. That's kind of what I like about it.
Warning.
Hopefully
Low
this is
motor
right.
RPM.
As soon as the pump
0.
gets above 90,
Low motor
this value
RPM.
or this warning will stop.
Warning. Low motor RPM. 36. Stopping fuel. Warning.
Shut off test.
Warning. Low motor RPM. 0.
Perfect.
Warning. Low motor RPM.
All right, so let me show you in the room. It's easier to show you.
RPM. 0.
All right, I get that. I'm going to shut down the trim so it's going to stop the alert. What we did here in our the alarms, we had this set up under PW2. I guess some turbine engines will have 2 factors to the pump voltage. We had it set up on P2. Put it to P1 or PW specifically. That fixed the problem. Now we have a flameout alert that will tell us if the pump power value goes below 90. Remember we said once the pump power is at 100, it's at idle. So we've successfully set up our flameout caution and we now have it on our screen. A couple of other minor things we have to do is reset the scale for our pump, because at 90 and above it's maxed out the scale, it's all the way to the top. I want that pump at idle be probably closer to 3/4 full, but not full and not below that either, so we have a visual representation of what's going on.
So how much of a pain in the butt was it switching from Spectrum to the Jeti?
Yeah, it wasn't easy. It's an entirely different language that I knew we were capable of learning, but a lot of YouTube videos, kind of like this one. And Harry Curzon, who's a awesome British bloke over in the UK, has done what he's called the Jeti...
Harry's Clinic.
Harry's Clinic.
Harry's Jeti Clinic.
Harry's Jeti Clinic. Awesome guy, very knowledgeable, knows this radio inside and out. And if I'm not mistaken, one of the developers, or at least the brains behind how to develop the app for the Lua app, so he can put some of this stuff into the transmitter. Maybe wrong on that. I don't know, but he's a great guy. Check him out, Harry Curzon on YouTube. If you do get the Jeti, I strongly recommend it. Watch all of his videos. He's very intuitive, very easy to follow, and he knows his stuff. So we watched a lot of YouTube to figure out how to program. It's a lot more in depth, meaning you can change almost any setting, not only the receiver, but the transmitter. It's easier to program stuff individually without worrying about what port do I plug it into. You really don't need to worry about that. You can tell the receiver what port you're plugged into, what kind of channel that port is, whether it's a PPM input, whether it's X-bus, S-bus, serial, whether it's a sensor, for instance, telemetry. And it's actually pretty intuitive once you learn it. But no, it was a pain. It was a pain.
We were in this garage for a couple hours, up to like 3, 4 a.m. some nights, trying to figure this thing out.
And you know what's nerve-wracking? What's absolutely nerve-wracking is this jet is not cheap. It's our first miniaturized turbine aircraft. Worked long and hard to be able to get this jet, and now we're switching radio systems. We know it works under the Spectrum, flew it under the Spectrum, and everything was great. I felt confident in the model and the radio. First time flying the jet with Jeti was nerve-wracking because we had to make sure that we programmed everything correctly. Now, Nick and I were in this garage until what, 3?
Was it last night?
A couple nights ago when we set everything up, checking all throws, checking to make sure everything was adjusted correctly, checking to make sure every switch we threw did exactly what we wanted it to do in the model. We had to incorporate a couple of mixing menus. For instance, we mixed flaps with elevator so that everybody knows, or you may not know, but when you introduce flaps in an aircraft, the aircraft tends to pitch up. When you decrease flaps, it tends to nose over. But we'd like that to be auto-functioned out, meaning that I want the elevator to give me some negative elevator input when I put flaps in, so that you don't notice a pitch at all. Now, I remember that the person that built this jet, his name is Chris Barton. Chris, very knowledgeable guy. He's been doing this for as long as I have, but he's into the turbines and he knows what he's doing there. And he builds a beautiful model. Since this was the first turbine that Nick and I have ever owned, we wanted somebody to professionally do it. Chris knows these numbers off the back of his hand, spits them out. And I remember him saying 15% elevator for flaps. I'm going to start there. I'm going to add 15% negative elevator for flaps. And it's linear, meaning the more flaps you put, the 15% elevator input is going to match it. So he set it at 15%. Nick,
It was perfect.
It was perfect, right?
Yeah.
Chris, dude, nice. I mean, we put those flaps in and the aircraft did not move, to the point where I'm like, did I hit the right switch? But we did, and the aircraft was perfectly straight all the way through the flap linear movement. The elevator is proportional to that movement. Jeti's telling us that we haven't touched her in a while, so We'll just go ahead and get it back active. So that worked out really well, but changing from the Jeti or from Spectrum to Jeti was a little nerve-wracking because we've been working Spectrum. Nick and I know everything about Spectrum, from the receivers to the transmitter. We can set you up a custom mix in 3 seconds. Jeti's a little more involved. It's a little more on the professional side. Not the Spectrum's not professional. Very good company, very great, very good radio. But there's more functionality with the Jeti than there was in the Spectrum, and we needed to get into that functionality. I was happy with it out of the box. Nick, I think, was a little nervous because Nick is our mechanic. He sits in his garage. This is Nick's garage, and he has to bend to my will, so to speak. I tell him what I want done, and he's like, okay, I'll figure it out, Dad. But the Jet, I wanted to be more involved in it. I wanted to know exactly what the functions were in the programming side of it so that I could adjust it and make sure it was good on my own. So I got a little more involved in the radio side, and Nick and I kind of learned that together. Now, as far as the radio itself, not much different than Spectrum as far as feel. It is heavier. It does feel more well built. I'm not dogging on Spectrum. Spectrum, Futaba, JR, all great radios. Matter of fact, when Nick was still in a car carrier, I was nothing but JR. Loved JR, but I was flying helis at the time. And at the time, JR was the only one with a 5-point throttle curve. Back then, we didn't have gyros, so we had to mix in revolution mixing. We had to program the radio to do what we thought the aircraft was going to do based on the torques of the rotor head. And JR was the only one that had a 5-point. I know, right now, if you're looking at this and saying 5 points, insanely low. Now it is, but they weren't digital back then. They had to reprogram them directly in the remote itself. So I was JR. Went to Futaba for a little bit. Futaba was hard at that time to learn. We switched to Spectrum. Spectrum is great because they're intuitive for the person just getting into this hobby. The menus that come up, you know what it is, you know what it does. It's easy to program, but not only that, they've got a lot of files out there on the internet that you can download right into the transmitter for the aircraft. Program it, say I have the Super Cub, everything's programmed for you automatically. So Spectrum has their market for that. They do that. When you get to the next level and you're doing all the micro programming on your own, we felt that Jeti was a better solution for us. May not be for you. Most likely, since we're tagging this video Jeti and turbines, you're probably doing the same thing. So hopefully you can learn from our mistakes and we can kind of guide you through a little quicker than trying to do it on your own.
All right, so you probably have seen in the back that I have done some work to the trailer from the last time you guys saw it. While Dad's still figuring out his overly complex stuff, I'm going to show you around the new trailer. This is what we have come up with so far. We just used some basic floorboard and some 2x4s to create the second level for the 2 big airplanes. That way we also can fit 2 more airplanes. You also notice that the floor, it's actually like a rubber laminate, so it's very easy to lay down. We just rolled it out, cut it, and stapled it. We actually didn't glue it to the floor. Wanted something that we could easily rip up if we wanted to. If we ever wanted to replace it, do a new color or something like that, or the next guy that gets this trailer one day or something can actually just replace it himself. So that's what we have so far in the back half. It really opened up a lot of room in the back. And now the front, we have a smaller toolbox that we actually angled a little bit to try to get a little bit more area in here because it is already very tight. And we put a fridge. We have now gone to the field a couple times with this setup, and having a fridge is so freaking nice at a field, it's not even funny. Also, we are going to need somewhere to sleep. So these are the disco beds that I was talking about. We have those in. They were very tight. Originally, they were actually about 2.5 inches too long. If you guys ever do the disco beds and you want to put them in your trailer and they don't fit, the rails in the center part are actually just straight tube rails. See, measured it out. I cut them about 2.5 inches, and it made it to where it fit perfectly. It made it to where the fabric was pretty close to the end, but on both sides, but it still works. So that's going to make it fairly comfortable for us. We also have an AC unit right there. That's going to be going there to vent all the hot air out. And so now this is our little living quarters. I was recommending to Dad that we'll probably one day actually create a wall separating the back half from the front half to basically create a living area for the AC to not have as much area do they have to cool. So that will make it a little bit easier for the AC unit. So far, I'm fairly happy with it. I think even though we put these big things in here, we still can put things underneath them. We can put things on top of them. So we really created a shelving unit to where we're not using them. These also can fold, like the top part, the front part actually will fold down to like a couch, so you can just use them as a chair. Even up here, and even with just filled out right here, I can still very comfortably sit on it. So it really made this to like a little mini living room. When we're out at a big events for a week at a time, it's going to make it very comfortable. So far, I'm actually fairly satisfied. They're springy. I think they're going to be very nice to sleep on. A lot better than an air mattress, I'm hoping. Done an air mattress a couple times in this trailer, and it's okay, but I'm hoping that this is a lot better. We'll probably be upgrading it a little bit more throughout it. Another thing we also did, we noticed when we last event that we were at nighttime, people are working on airplanes. They're doing all kinds of stuff. So we got a light. Let me tell you, this thing is freaking bright. Oh, because I have it unplugged. Oh yeah, we need to do a strip. We have these little cheap LEDs underneath to make it to light up underneath. And to get this bar, because it's a 12 volt, we had to get a power supply. So that's what this guy is a basic power supply. A little overkill than what we need, but it did make it to where we could add other things to it if we wanted to. But I'm unplug those little lights. We're gonna plug this one in, and now light thing is really freaking bright, and at night it's gonna really light up the whole back side of the trailer. Gonna make it really nice to work behind it. So last time we were there, we had a very lack of light, so it was almost impossible to try to work on stuff at night while at an event. So there's the trailer. So far, the Raven, we have probably about, say, 10, 20 flights on it already. How many flights do we have in the Raven so far? 10 flights, and it's been great. So haven't had no issues with it so far. Only thing we did have is, I don't know if I screwed it up, but somehow the wheel pants on both sides fell off. So flew it too hard, or pretty sure I put Loctite on it, but it's very possible that I forgot to put Loctite on. We're still waiting on a carburetor for the Flex. So once that comes in, we're going to replace the carburetor, and hopefully that fixed all of our tuning issues that we were having when we first tried to maiden it. So we haven't flown the Flex yet. Hopefully we can fly it before the event. That way I don't have to fly it do a maiden of an airplane at a big event. But if we have to, then it is what it is. How's your overcomplication going?
I'm just kind of fine-tuning at this point. For instance, I'm changing the scales on my RPM to 160,000 max. And I'm trying to get the pump values to give me a green arc right around the 90 to 300. And the battery from 10 volts to about 8.7.
Okay. So this is the software so this is Henry software?
Well, this is actually Henry software. We can actually decide which kind of turbine we want or what kind of gauge we want. Then we have to change the values in here to change the range on the values. And then we enter that software into Jeti. And once we get into the Jeti, the transmitter is not connected right now, but once it's connected, I can go into the Jeti app that we got, the Lua app. I can load it onto the radio, but it only loads on a generic template. So if I set in Harry's app, if I set 120 as my max value, it's going to load that template onto the control, and therefore my max values are going to be messed up. Trying to just fine tune it at this point. Now I know how it works. Now I know how to get it on the radio, but it's now not intuitive how to set up all the little finer details. Now I'm just playing around, trying to get it perfect.
Dad loves freaking technology. Like me, I just want it to basic things. Is it overheating and what's my time? So that's like the telemetry that I always want. Dad wants everything, man.
I want everything.
He wants everything, and he wants it all looking pretty on his transmitter.
I want it looking pretty.
So that's my dad. That's what he always likes to do. And I'm over here like, do you really need that?
No.
Well, that's going to be it for today's video. Just a short video just showing what we're kind of working on, prepping up for the Great Lakes event, showing what we kind of go through on programming the jet, and also how the trailer looks. Looks a lot better than from when you last saw it. So thank you very much from us at Hobby Extreme, hopefully, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye, everyone.
Oh,